Hello, my name is Jackie Gruber and I'm an English teacher at Great Valley High School. There I teach 10th and 12th grade. What you see here is a literature review on how screencast technology can potentially impact student learning and save teacher time, what voices in the field have to say about related topics. Before I go into the actual literature review, I wanted to go over some of the screencast technology that I'm going to be using to create the review, as that's the focus of my study. So what you see here is a tool created by Smart Technology. You can see the toolbar over here. This is a technology that Great Valley provides teachers with, and it's a result of having the smartboard. It comes with it. This little sun, love that icon. This is Jing, which you can download for free from the internet. The reason I'm using this record function right now is because videos can be uploaded on YouTube up to 15 minutes, whereas Jing, the free version anyway, only allows 5-minute recording. So I'll use this for the third video in a series. So getting into the lit review and the problem I pose, the problem that we have here is that with teaching, there's literally an infinite amount of time that you can pour into lessons, conferencing with students, and grading. And when I think about how I spend my time, most of it is on grading. And so, because of the demands of the profession, time is precious and limited. Still, don't get me wrong, I love my kids, and I see writing feedback, communicating about rhetoric as paramount. Student learning is my priority. If we can assume similar sentiments exist among most of us, how do we use our time efficiently? That question is vague, sure, but that's the issue. The gray concept of efficiency gets at important variables in our profession. Our time and their learning, and where the two meet up in a cost-effective way. Through this study, I try to negotiate the effectiveness of my time spent on providing feedback and the impact it has on student learning. With regard to my research, this quandary unfolds into more specific questions. How do we get the most bang for our buck as educators? What is effective feedback? And what really makes kids learn how to write well? If learning is paramount and time is limited, how do we prioritize learning with time confinements? Specifically, I focus on this question for my study. How can we use technology to enhance student learning and conserve teacher time? And that becomes the central focus of my exploration. Pedagogical scholars have been using audio feedback to try to answer this question since the 80s and the 90s with tape recorders. With the ubiquity of technology, the process of providing students with oral feedback expands, and accordingly it becomes more streamlined. Especially with screencast technology like Jing or recordings that can be uploaded onto YouTube like this one. These technologies allow teachers to use screencasts, live recordings of the screen like the one that you're seeing now, to give feedback to students orally, physically pointing out areas of the screen. So I might gesture to screencast.com, for instance, as you see my mouse hovering over it. My idea is that Screencast can help negotiate the complicated equation of cost effectiveness where variables include teacher time and student learning, and from there negotiate the resultant happy. Where's the happy medium? Ultimately, and unfortunately, I argue that screencasts only save a negligible amount of time. However, fortunately, from my research, screencasts do help students' writing improve, enhance interpersonal connections between teacher and student, and create a better emotional experience for the teacher, i.e. the evaluator, when grading. Before I go into specific studies, I want to reveal my methodology and my findings in generalities. I'm explaining this to you up front so you can follow how seemingly different voices speak to one another. To inform my conclusion, I situate among the following assertions, and through this literature review, you will hear how previous studies envelop my exploration. First, college students prefer screencasts. A lot of the research studies that I go into illustrate this point. Even though screencast technology and the research therein is relatively new, there's a dearth of studies impacting how screencasts directly impact student learning. Most of the studies are on preferences of college students that I've read. So I forward some arguments from audio feedback, also some of which are anecdotal, but I make the assumption, because of the similar characteristics of this genre, since you can hear what needs to be improved or commentary on the paper, I forward arguments made from audio response and the benefits of audio to Screencast, because I imagine that since as educators we're just adding another sense, another venue. You can see and hear as opposed to just being able to hear. And accordingly, I forward research on the benefits of audio feedback and include them in support of Screencasts. Finally, I consult pedagogues who support conferencing models and illustrate how conferencing models positively impact student learning, because some of the studies that I'm going to talk about discuss how Screencasts can resemble conferencing models because of their proclivity to have the interpersonal connection. Accordingly, you'll hear more specifically about the conclusions among these myriad voices. Still, note together that these voices, audio response, students preferring Screencasts, and pedagogues and conferencing model, inform my argument and the findings that I argue. Students prefer Screencasts, enhance interpersonal connections between teacher and student, and can help educators apply accepted, quote-unquote, best practice methodology, and that's what you're going to hear about over here. So first, I'll focus on a study by Cruz and Wilkinson. This is really a central focus of my study, and toward the end, I'll go into what questions this leaves for me to answer and where really my research begins as a result of this literature review. So now that you have a roadmap of where we're going, what are researchers saying about Screencast technology? Cruz and Wilkinson performed a research study whose primary objective was to assess students' perception of effective feedback. This is going to turn off for a second. I'm going to hide this bar so you can see a little bit better. Here's the title of the article. Because they focus on students' preferences, they empower students as writers, I imagine, and thus they take in the perception of feedback. That, to me, is effective. Creating an identity as a writer inherently improves writing because of authorial responsibility. Identifying with a piece often encourages. So as a researcher, I value the students' perception of feedback because their preferences indicate their investment in it. You'll hear more about empowering student writers in the general sense from Kittle, Murray, and Sommers a little bit later in the pedagogue component of my argument. As I said, I use their methods and modify them to inform my perspective on how to implement Screencasts. So in Cruz and Wilkinson, they discover a hierarchy of student preferences. They found that marking the paper is not the most effective form of feedback. They couch their findings among a number of studies. For instance, a much more didactic voice, researchers quote White, whose radical view characterizes traditional commentary as uneconomical, unreliable, pedagogically uncertain, or descriptive and theoretically bankrupt. And if you would like to look at some of the studies that Cruz and Wilkinson forward and the citation for those, there's footnotes at the end of this presentation. Cruz and Wilkinson study specifically finds the following hierarchy of student preferences. Lastly, students prefer text comments. Next, they prefer track changes, a function of Microsoft Word. The next on their list of preference is audio response. And then finally, Screencast is at the top. When it comes to receiving feedback, students preferred screencasting. A limitation of the Cruz and Wilkinson study and others I use is that the audience and the research is mostly on college students in first-year writing classes. This creates exigency for my argument because I'm interested in what high school students have to say about their preferences. However, I imagine results will come out similarly, with high school students preferring Screencast most. And in my future argument, I make recommendations accordingly. Specifically, students in this study report preferring to view the paper using Screencast, hear the professor, and see e-written comments being composed live. This, according to Cruz and Wilkinson, is the most efficacious means of receiving criticism. Cruz and Wilkinson forward other studies. They consult Huber and Fried's study of the 8 characteristics indicative of learner-centered teaching. Again, you can consult that footnote later. 4 of the 8 characteristics of learning-centered teaching involve Cruz and Wilkinson's study specifically. Screencasts, which include the teacher writing out typed comments during the video feed, they invite students being actively involved in feedback, and thus becoming increasingly sophisticated learners and knowers, while teachers coach and facilitate intertwining teaching and assessing. The added benefit is that learning is interpersonal. That's a consequence of screencasting, according to Cruz and Wilkinson, as they forward Huber and Fried's argument on learning-centered teaching. Dr. Jeffrey Sommers, a Westchester professor and co-author of Heterotopic Space, echoes this same sentiment. Not only does orality increase the interpersonal connection between teacher and student, but students feel closer to the professor with oral commentary. And professor immediacy and interpersonal connection motivates effort and achievement. These are factors that positively correlate with students' learning. And so, for my argument, learner-centered teaching is an efficacious practice because it encourages student involvement, teacher as coach, sophisticated learning, and interpersonal experience. I forward these arguments to bolster my idea that the interpersonal experience is something that inherently enhances student learning. Studies show by Denton, Madden, Roberts, and Rowe, another article that Cruz and Wilkinson cite, they found that students who received electronic feedback considered the information more important when compared to handwritten feedback. They say it also enhances the feeling of instructor immediacy, and thus teachers can use technology as a tool, virtually assessing writing as we sit with the learner to improve writing skills. While this study fully supports my argument for using screencasting, researchers also comment on the method specifically. In my final mode, a how-to guide which persuasively argues for screencast feedback, I will also provide tips and tricks. I will include the study of Cruz and Wilkinson to encourage teachers to process thoughts and write commentary live. So what to take from this study, I'm going to show you the idea of live written commentary. Cruz and Wilkinson advocate that teachers, to help students understand the thinking, actually write the commentary live. So they say live commentary. Also, according to their study, screencasts help make the feedback feel more important, according to students' anecdotal feedback. And finally, they help instructor immediacy, meaning it feels like the instructor is actually, with you as the instructor is going over the feedback. So that's what they mean by writing some live commentary. So I forward these arguments done largely about college classrooms and use them to inform my ideas about how this can be implemented in a high school classroom. So I'm going to stop my argument, my lit review here, upload this video, and then come right back with the next 2 components of my literature review, where I forward arguments from audio response and I consult some best practice methodology about how we can best teach the writing process. So I will be right back.